Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. There's no doubt that the last 20 months have changed us and our relationship with the world. For retailers, this has resulted in an unprecedented shift in consumer behavior that has proven difficult to stay ahead of, let alone predict. In today's episode of The Voice of Retail, we're going to step inside the mind of the modern consumer by unpacking the latest research coming out of EY. I'm thrilled to be welcoming back to the podcast Kristina Rogers, chairwoman of the EY Global Consumer Board, who takes us through the latest edition of EY's Future Consumer Index. We cover the key takeaways, surprising findings, and more. Stick around for Kristina's 3 points for retailers as they plan for 2022 and beyond.
I think we can drop new now. I don't think we need to say we're living in a new normal. The way we're reading our data is that most consumers around the world are living in normal, right? Whatever that has come to mean, for them. And so in the most recent research, we noted that 63% of consumers say that the new habits they've adopted, whatever those are, feel like the way they will carry on.
Let's listen in now. Kristina, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Michael. I'm great and delighted to be back, and very sorry we couldn't make good on our promise to meet up in person. I think we did promise that quite some time ago, but at least the border is open. So there's some progress there, which is fantastic.
Yeah, you're right. You're right on all those accounts. A, it's not your first, I think it's your third time on the podcast, so welcome back, I should say. And then B, we're making progress, right? Where the border's open, and as I've been saying, you can see the end zone, the goalposts keep moving a little bit, but things are good. You're traveling now. We were talking off mic. You're starting to travel a little bit, which is back to your old life. Hey, I'm curious. Are you, as you think about your life as the tradecraft of what you do you imagine today going back to travel the same way? Do you think it's going to ramp up, or do you think it's changed for good? Do your clients still want to see you in person and see you in the data room? Like, how are you feeling about that?
I hope they don't want to see me in the data room. I think it's changed for good. Simply for a couple of reasons. One, at least in my case, but I think for all professional services, I had a very good relationship with people that I worked with as a result of all the traveling I did, pre-pandemic. Yeah. So it's been a very easy transition to things that are, over video. And we've figured out how to do all of that and do it, reasonably well. I mean, people tire of it, I do think in person now and then is going to be necessary because that's just, I think, what we all need. But I don't think we're going back to that. And frankly, certainly from an EY perspective, we have made a lot of carbon commitments, and us not traveling the world helps to support some of those.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I thought you were going to say that it probably does, as it does for everyone. It's very cost effective as well. So you can transfer even more value to your clients, by not traveling the world. But that's interesting, the sustainability angle.
Yeah, I think there's the third leg, which I think you just said well, which is certainly just expenses down and all of that. Yeah. So there's a number of reasons why I can't see that returning. And I frankly, after, a couple of years now without doing international travel, don't need it to return in that way, personally.
Well, we've jumped right in, so let's take a quick step back. Tell us about yourself, a bit of your background for those folks who hadn't heard our prior interviews, and what you do at EY.
So I am Canadian by background. I don't know if that's as evident anymore, Michael, but my accent has changed since most of my career has been abroad, living in Turkey, in the UK, and here in the US now. And at EY, I'm our global consumer industries leader, hence the conversation around traveling so much. Right, I used to spend a lot of time with retailers and consumer products companies around the world. And my role is really to think about where are those industries going, and hence what's EY's reaction, what sort of services do we need to continue to develop and coordinate to ensure that we bring the best of EY to our clients in those spaces.
Now, where are you based out of? What do you call home, and where are we talking to you today? Where do you situate in the US?
I'm based in Chicago now.
Wonderful.
And so that always reminds me of my early days working in Toronto.
Yeah.
Very similar cities in some extent, and on the lake. So that's where I am. I've been in the Chicago area for about 6 years now.
Oh, fantastic. And now Illinois, I think, has legalized recreational cannabis. Am I right? Is that one of the things in the States?
Well, if the number of stores that have popped up, and I'm sure you went through the same thing a few years ago, but certainly there's plenty of evidence that it is legal from all of the new stores that are around. And then at the airport, you have the drop boxes encouraging people to, drop their goods before going to a state where it's not legal or a country.
We had here in Ontario, there was a big log jam because of some decisions made by the government, but then that log jam opened up in the middle of COVID. We had 1,000 stores open last year.
Yeah, it's crazy.
In the past 12 months. And as I often say, it's wonderful because it's not creating new market. It's actually just shifting that market from, for organized crime into the legal market where they pay taxes and hire employees and do all those things. So I don't know, what'll be interesting to see for both of us maybe next time we chat in that little vertical, because it's a microcosm of competition. Because, all right, so there's 10 of them in a block. As you said, it's probably the same. They tend to cluster a little bit. Can they all survive? Should they all survive? How do they survive? How do they differentiate? So it's pretty interesting, right?
Some of them are enormous, to be honest. I mean, there's the high street types, which are, if you think about, just on but then there are some that are really, really big. And here it's a little different. Your experience is probably different in that it's a national legalization.
Yeah.
Whereas here it's state by state. So that presents its own challenges of just being in business.
Yeah, just banking, for example.
Yeah, banking for sure.
Anyway, this isn't a podcast about retail cannabis, but I think we could have one because it's it's a pretty fun topic. Let's talk about the 8th edition of the EY Future Consumer Index. So first of all, it's out now and available. I'll ask you later where we can find it. Maybe I'll be able to put a link in the show notes. But first of all, tell us about the overall objectives of the index itself and a little bit of the tradecraft, the methodology, scope and scale, that kind of stuff.
Well, Michael, it's incredible to think that this work has been going on since April 2020. I at the time just took my remaining budget for our fiscal year and said, let's launch something to, track consumer behavior. I had an inkling that since our lives had been turned upside down, there might just be some changes in consumer behavior and sentiment along the way. Yeah. And the point of the index is really to do that, right? To track consumer behavior, intent, and sentiment as we were going through the pandemic. And as you just said, we're on cycle 8 now. We cover 16,000 people across 21 countries, and we've added this go-round Mexico and South Africa with the hope of being able to keep those countries in the index. As it feels to me like this has been something where we look back and we say, interesting. I mean, in such a short period of time, transition, sentiment and consumer behavior really is changing.
Yeah, and Canada, we should mention for my Canadian audience. For those in Canada, Canada is included in the results. I'm just reading here, 16,000 consumers, and it was done very recent, right? 6 weeks.
Early October.
Early October. So we're talking about fresh data.
Yep.
Global fresh baked.
Yeah, fresh off the track. So, but Canada is involved and has been involved from the beginning. So it's very interesting. We can do a really nice deep dive into each country that's been there from the start.
Well, it's often the case when I look at global studies that include Canada. On the one hand, it's remarkable how attitudes are fairly global. Like there's some differences, but not many. But every now and then there's something that pokes itself up as something culturally or materially different. So we'll look forward to seeing a slice of that data as well. All right, so let's dig in. So when you and I were talking off mic about both our experiences talking to retailers and brands who are saying, okay, I get that we've had, this circuit breaker of consumer behavior for 18 months, 24 months by the time we're done, 36 months by the time we're done, who knows? What has changed in terms of consumer behavior and habits just to accommodate to the weirdness of COVID, the COVID era? But more fundamentally interesting, what has changed permanently? What has actually altered consumer behavior on a go forward basis. So as you think about that question, what jumps out at you from the research where consumers are saying, this has changed. This is different behavior from pre-COVID, from the before time?
Yeah, and you made a good point. I mean, one of the things we were trying to track in terms of behavior is what would stick, and then what would kind of go back to the way we were. And I think from my perspective, and I'll given I've got fresh data, I will drop some data bombs on you. I think we can drop new now. I don't think we need to say we're living in a new normal. The way we're reading our data is that most consumers around the world are living in normal, right? Whatever that has come to mean, for them. And so in the most recent research, we noted that 63% of consumers say that the new habits they've adopted, whatever those are, feel like the way they will carry on. Right, so 50%, expect to continue living the way they have been living, and they like some of their new habits, whether it's flexibility, but certainly work-wise, use of digital, starting to focus on experiences and better experiences, and having reflected on what they've been through, you can see that consumers are looking for a better version of normal, let's say. And I think part of that is just accepting that risks and threats are kind of around every day, and they're everyday concerns, and that there's not much to do to worry about them unless it's a real financial worry that you can't provide for yourself.
Right.
So there's, I think, a real sense of just getting on with it. So that's one thing we've seen. Certainly one thing that we've been noticing, and we will continue to track this going forward, is this desire to want less random consumption. So I don't have the hard and fast economic spending data. So it's sentiment and intent, but consumers are saying they want to buy better. Right? They've had the time to reflect, better quality, and wanting to use their money in a better way.
Less stuff, more purpose, or more,
more experience, more purpose.
Yeah.
You see, spending less on what they see as unnecessary. So you even, I think, maybe you had this experience, Michael, just sitting at home, working from home, noticing all the things that you have around you that are maybe not needed.
Clutter
For sure.
Yeah.
We even saw, something like 48% of people said it became very obvious, this will make you laugh, that they had too many clothes. Now, we weren't doing much. We were all sitting around, in the same yoga pants and just looking good from the neck up. But
that's right.
But I think that will stay. That feels to me like a trend that's been tracking, and we're just seeing it strengthen over time.
Apparel has been just, in one way, some parts of apparel have just thrived, your active wear, your casual wear, but other parts of apparel have just been punished during the COVID era. It sounds like if you were sitting in front of some of the fast fashion folks, they've got a challenge on their hands by, if I read that into your data, that I want to buy better and buy product that's going to last. I still see volumes coming out of, some of these brands. So is that a paradox in your mind, or what do you think's going on there?
Maybe there's a bit of catch up with pent up demand to some extent. And I would like to see the data you have, at a generational basis, because I think there's one of the things that I think, to your point, is a paradox, is you have younger generations saying that they care more about the environment and they want to be conscious and, buy things that are sustainable. But then those are the generations that are also very much influenced by drop culture.
Yeah, and they're buying from sites like Shine, which are just like fast.
Right. Did it drop today? Did an influencer tell me I need it? And so there's definitely a paradox there.
Well, it's like I talk to my daughter who's in that generation. I'm like, you buy more ethically in all parts of your life. What are you doing? Holding your nose and saying, I'm going to buy.
Right. I need 10 pairs of sneakers, and so those trends are we're definitely monitoring that. But I do think one last thing I'll just touch on, and this won't surprise you. There's just an acceptance that digital is becoming the default.
Yeah.
Right. So that it's the default channel for work, education, shopping, maybe medical appointments, exercise, even socializing, right? Meals together, watching movies together online, having a glass of wine together, all very accepted now. Yeah. And there's, a bunch of data hanging around, which really supports that. And if you have a child in the generation we were just talking about, there was a point in your life where you were asking politely and then maybe not so politely for your child to get off the screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you actually consciously monitored screen time. And that's, out the window.
Yeah, it's out the window. I think this time is in my mind full of paradoxes, because on the one hand, we see this great acceleration, lots of digital first, but on the other hand, evidence of, stores still matter. Stores aren't going anywhere. You see these digital native vertical brands, they raise money in IPOs, and the first line item on what you're going to do with all this money is open stores. Like, it's really interesting, right? This paradox and this bifurcation, so to speak, of I want to shop in person, I want to shop online, and the purpose of stores, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I would say I'm noticing. I've been both out of our data, but also just my observation with clients and reading and so on. The ability to really integrate that physical and digital experience, I think if you can win there, you're a winner.
Yeah, right on.
That's important.
How did brands fare during all this? I know you work with a lot of big packaged goods brands, or fast-moving consumer good brands, or brands of all sorts. And I hear two schools of thought. One is brands matter more. That kind of feeds back to your conscious consumption and consume better. And I hear others where brands don't matter at all. I just want what I want. And where do you sit on that? Anything that came out of the survey around preferences for brands?
Well, we did see, and we've been tracking, that was something that was fascinating for me too. If you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, certain items, certain categories were completely out of stock, right? You couldn't find them. So people did try different brands, not their favorite, or they went to private label. Yeah. And so there's definitely been, for certain categories, that has lingered. So people have found that there are things that are just fine, and they've continued to use them. And I would say half of our respondents globally noted that on the whole, brands are less important. I think we would want to have an unpack of that, right, at a really detailed category level. So my hypothesis, that tends to be for a lot of household consumer products brands. Although, to your point, I think there's an opportunity here if you want to think about quality, if I care about sustainability and getting information about where these things come from or how they're made, there's certainly an opportunity to use the brand to signal, right, those sorts of things that I care about. So I personally don't believe, Michael, that is there to stay. So even though we're getting that kind of response out of our data, that's certainly one thing I would like to see 6-9 months time. Yeah. Where are we there? And I wouldn't expect the same thing in luxury, of course. Right. The luxury, I think, is having a revival in some geographies. And of course, brands matter.
Right on. Yeah, they matter pretty deeply at that level. I had the opportunity to talk to the CMO of Poshmark for one of my other podcast, Conversation with Commerce Next, and we were talking about that because they have if you know Poshmark, they allow a consumer to consumer peer-to-peer market, but they have a service where they allow or invite consumers to send in their products for a validation. If it's a high-priced brand over $500, and very popular service. So brands are certainly, I want to know I'm getting the right. I want to know I'm getting the actual brand. That's pretty important any day. Speaking of brands, I'm not sure I would have wanted to be a beauty company over the past 2 years. I certainly did want to be a beauty company selling lip products. Maybe I want to be a beauty product right now selling teeth whiteners after everybody's worn masks and stuff. But there was some information about how consumers are feeling about the beauty category. In other words, maybe it's like fashion. I realized I don't need as much of it, maybe just purely because I'm not going out as much as I used to. Again, you see some paradoxes. The hair coloring was one of the top selling items about a year ago.
Right.
And then I know in my social circle that some friends of mine just said, well, forget it. I don't need to do this anymore. I'm not going to color my hair anymore. Forget it. So any trends that you picked up from a deeper perspective around beauty and that beauty category?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating too, as someone who was probably a heavy user of beauty and cosmetics. And I think the beauty industry, the ones that work through social influencers, geared maybe towards younger consumers, is still going, reasonably strong. But I think that you're right. If I look at our global data, it suggests that 47% of respondents intend to pare down their beauty routines and their cosmetics purchases, and that they, around the same number, and this would go across both genders, just claim they're more comfortable in their own skin. Right. Mm-hmm. So they've kind of, reflected. And I think that goes hand in hand to your point about, of course, we've had less occasions maybe to wear cosmetics.
Well, less going into work, certainly. I mean,
less going into work, less going out to parties, less going out for dinner. Yeah. And so I think a lot of those habits that at least think about, in my case, that I've had since I'm 15 years old or whatever, right? That's been destroyed. That's been broken. And I think that a lot of those products, rely on habitual, my habit for buying them over and trying new things, right? I mean, within the category. And so, I think the industry does have some thinking to do in terms of what will bring consumers back. And maybe, that is, if we think about what we were talking about earlier, higher quality products, maybe changing the products, right? Being more environmentally conscious or sustainable, both in the packaging and the product, and being able to give us information, right, about that. I think that's going to be a real challenge for these companies. They might have great intentions of doing that, but how do I know it's true? How do I have the data for that? We've certainly seen more interest in this topic in that category over the life of the Future Consumer Index.
Sure, I'd imagine. I thought at some points during the COVID era that it would break the back of consumerism, but I look at the dozens of cargo ships sitting off the coasts of Vancouver and LA, and I look at the NRF is talking about between a 9 and 11% year-over-year growth in holiday spending. And so, again, we've talked about paradox a couple of times. It doesn't look like it. It looks like consumers are spending a lot and having a lot of intention. You've, I think, called it pent-up demand, whether it's pent-up demand or whether it's just what I've called the stockpile of cash, money that they're just not spending on other things. What does the survey tell us about consumption, and what are your observations?
I think you're right about the pile of cash. So people do have money to spend, but I do think they're being more judicious about it. So what do I want to spend on? And we've definitely seen a change from the very beginning. One of the questions around buying things because it makes them feel happy, right? So we kind of associate consumerism sometimes with that, right? It makes me feel good. I like it. I wanted to buy something.
I shop, therefore I am, right?
Yeah, and that's really kind of 27% of respondents agreeing with that statement. And so I think there has been a real rethink, and that gets back to the stuff, right? In terms of having too many clothes, or just too much around my home. So I think it will be I think retailers especially need to really be thinking, what are they spending on? Yeah. Right. So is it transitioning to quality and value versus a large basket?
53% of consumers are more likely to repair things instead of replacing them. That's interesting, right? That feels different to me.
That does feel different. It's less throwaway than I think maybe I grew up with in some sense. But part of that, and we could unpack that from a demographic point of view. But I do think that the one thing, and I just mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the cosmetics, this notion of sustainability and what we're doing to our planet has been a topic that has grown in importance, at least in terms of intention, through our research. And so, we went through that phase last year where the skies were clear in Los Angeles and all that stuff, right? But then I think people also were home and they just saw the amount of garbage and things we throw out and wondering where is it all going. So there's been a lot more conversation about it. And I do think there's people out there, consumers out there, really trying to see what is the part they can do in the circular economy. I hear that term more and more, and it's not
upcycling. I hear
not just in Europe anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of these things, whether it's privacy or environmental, starts in Europe, but I hear a lot of it upcycling, cross-cycling. I mean, even H&M in Canada has launched a resale platform.
I also think in that case, as you know, we're talking about people shifting some of their spending, even if they've got a pile of cash to spend, towards experiences and services.
Yeah.
And so, do I want to repair something, or do I want to get rid of it and have a big cash outlay for something that probably could be fixed, depending on what it is? So there's, I think, some of that going on too, that transition between wanting to spend on goods and wanting to spend on things that make me feel happy, whether it's experiences or services I buy or things I do with, family and friends.
Yeah. I mentioned these boats sitting off the coast, these cargo ships, part of the supply pain that retailers and consumers are going through. I wonder what your thoughts are, if there's anything in the data around substitution, because we're kind of circling that issue. And I was speaking to the media last week, and they said, well, what's going to happen if consumers can't find the thing they were looking for? I said, well, they might not be able to find that brand, but there's 10 others that are similar. And I think some of the success in retail for the next couple of months is going to be consumers' willingness to substitute or even buy gift cards. Any insights or any thoughts on that?
I agree with you. The other thing too, Michael, we've all been made aware of in the media of the supply chain pinch. And that, right, if we most likely, we might not be able to find what we're looking for. And actually, we did some research around people's expectations for upcoming holiday shopping. And two of the pinch points, especially for online shopping, was, the cost of shipping seems to have risen, and people are becoming aware of that. So it's expensive, real friction point. And then just finding things. So lots of stockouts when you even look online. So there was some belief that maybe if you go in store, you might actually find what you're looking for, because less people are going to stores. Although, any good retailer can give you visibility of what's in the store online as well. But I think that, look, we've some of the data I've seen throughout, and I've shared some of it with you before, people are willing to substitute. We've all lived through the last, 18 months of, either buying things, not buying things, finding brands we wanted, not finding them. I think, there's a lot more openness to the things you're describing for a vast majority of consumers.
Anything surprise you from the results in the survey? Anything jump out and go, wow, I didn't expect that?
There was some data that caught my eye, and this isn't, so I'm not a psychologist, neither are you.
I play one on television.
Right, exactly.
I play one on the podcast.
That sort of thing. But and this isn't really around shopping or buying, but it's, even in our most recent round, so October 2021, 35% of respondents said they feel lonelier now than they did, prior to the pandemic. So 2 years ago. And maybe that's not surprising, but what I found interesting was, 52% said they're much less likely to want to leave their home than before, unless they have to. And so, presumably somehow those things are related. But our physical social routines have really been busted up. And, how are we going to get people to be social again and off screens, or is that necessary? Are we transitioning into something where
the meta universe, we're going to the metaverse.
And I'm sure this looks different generationally, but I wondered about the impact that has. If I feel lonely and I don't necessarily want to go out for much, how am I shopping? What am I buying? How am I even getting the necessities I need, and so on? And how long will this take to transform, or is that just where we are?
Well, it's an interesting point, because as you know, shopping just isn't about a transaction. It's not about just getting a thing. It's social, it's cultural, it's interacting with people and all those things. So there's a role.
There's a role could be played, but if people are afraid, are sort of accustomed to not really going out much, and that might not be you or I, or that might not be our kids, but it's some swath of the population that just doesn't feel the need. And I think, some data we saw earlier in the year, which talked about, our homes becoming our hubs.
Right.
So, we've sort of set up gyms in our homes. We've started cooking more, or at least ordering in. We're doing all sorts of things from home. And home, to your point about DIY, home improvement became a big deal, redecorating, making your place a lot cozier. And so there's, possibly some of that going on. But that, to me, for retail, that just, begs for the, continued thinking about the real integration between, what I experience digitally when I am home or wherever I am, if I'm on my phone, on the bus or whatever, and what I experience when I get to the physical space.
So last question for you. Any words of wisdom, tips or advice, a couple of 2-3 things that jump out in terms of advice for the retailers listening about how to think about 2022 consumers and beyond?
I think I think this was off mic before we got on, but we were talking about the the ships sitting around the ports around the world, and whether what's on them is what people really want now, because were those things procured and ordered months and months and months ago, right? And here they are. And so I think, after, certainly through the holidays and come January, I think it'll be very important to really have a real analytical look at the data, the sales data, as much as can be, rather, not just traditional look, but, has what people are buying, actually changed? Is it moving beyond volume to quality? Is it value for real? What are the intentions here? And can we get hold of something that might, help understand the transition better that consumers are going through in terms of mindset, values, and habits? That would be kind of number one. If I was going to make some investment in terms of just, what am I doing after the holiday period? Really understanding what happened and why. I think continued investment in data and technology, so that you really become a trusted companion or a part of a person's life. So we talked about brands. That's part of it. I think brands can indicate trust. But some of the work that we've been doing, and I don't know if I shared this previously, around retail is really getting back to 3 simple I's, right? Immediacy, intimacy, and invisibility in the consumer's life. So immediacy, we all know what that means. I want it when I want it, and get it to me. Intimacy, really knowing me. What do you know about me? Right? Stop sending me things that have nothing to do with me, whether it's, texts, emails, other social media marketing, what have you. Get to know me. And then being invisible. So, be where I am. And I know you've talked about this on previous podcasts, that the consumer's the channel now. Yeah. So, right, I think you've said that many times, and that's true. You need to find me where I am. Yeah, right. Well, and that's I don't find you where you are anymore, especially when I haven't been going out. Right. If you have a physical store, I haven't been there for 18 months. You need to rethink how that works. Yeah. So that's certainly something. And I think, that gets to going back and forth easily between physical and digital. I think that's it's kind of the invisibility part of those 3 I's. And I think we talked about it. Do you need to really transform your business from people wanting to consume better, not buy more? Yeah, that's a big transition, right? Right. I mean, haven't we? Well, if we think about our just general economies in the Western world, right? The consumption part of our GDP is generally quite big. What happens when it's not so big, or it's less? And that what happens to our retailers and the people who want to sell us things, which in many cases, the model has been based on selling us more. Well, my guest is Kristina Rogers. It is the 8th edition of the EY Future Consumer Index. Where can folks learn more, get in touch with you? Tell us more. Well, on EY.com, the global site, there's data to be found. There's the global content, but they should, in every country where we do this research, Canada included, the local sites should have content, should have some thought leadership, should have some access to data. There's actually in the which I have found fascinating myself, to see what our, graphics people can do. You can go around and play with all the data there. So you just select a country, right? You just select what you want to do. You can compare it to other countries, et cetera. So there should be a function on all of those local and the global website where you can read and play around with some of the data and the graphics.
Fantastic. And you're on LinkedIn. Is that a good way to get in touch, reach out?
I'm on LinkedIn. I try to pay attention and be active there. So always available there.
All right. Well, as always, great conversation. Always learn something when I talk to you. Thank you for joining me on the podcast again. I wish you safe travels when you travel, and welcome back to Canada as you can come back and forth. We can both
much more easily, although I think I wish I was in the testing business. I have to say that.
Yeah, last year was the plexiglass business. This year's the testing business.
That's right.
That's right.
Well, thank you. This was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.